A businessman decides to personally investigate the reviews regarding the customer service in his company. Disguised, he enters as someone looking for help and soon notices something unsettling in the environment. Employees avoid contact, respond with coldness, and treat his presence as an inconvenience. But a single unexpected attitude exposes who truly understands the value of a person. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. Continuing. The morning light entered through the office windows on the 23rd floor, reflecting off the glass panels that displayed numbers, graphs, and projections. Enrique Almeida observed all of it with his usual expression, firm, controlled, calculating. At 42 years old, he had transformed a small neighborhood shop into one of the largest retail chains in São Paulo. 12 units scattered across the capital and the metropolitan region, more than 300 employees and a revenue that grew quarter after quarter. To anyone looking from the outside, Enrique was the personification of success, a man who knew how to see opportunities where others saw only risks, who invested when everyone hesitated, who built an empire with his own hands. But on that Tuesday morning, something different hung in the air. Enrique leafed through printed reports, slid his finger across the tablet screen, and checked detailed spreadsheets. The numbers were perfect. Sales were up, profit margins were healthy, expansion was on schedule. Everything was working like a well-adjusted gear. So why did that uncomfortable feeling persist, like a silent weight that the graphs could not dissipate? He stood up, walked to the panoramic window and watched the city below. São Paulo pulsed infinite and noisy, full of people rushing from one side to the other, each carrying their dreams, their struggles, their stories. Enrique had always been proud to be part of this mechanism, to generate jobs, to move the economy. But lately something had been bothering him. It wasn't the numbers, it was the words. Loose comments on social media, discreet complaints on review sites, observations made by acquaintances during business lunches. Nothing serious enough to generate a crisis, but constant enough not to be ignored. Coldness in service, arrogance from some employees, lack of attention to customers who didn't seem to have purchasing power. Enrique had always dismissed these complaints as exaggerations, dramas from people dissatisfied with their own lives. After all, the training sessions were conducted, the procedures were clear, and the goals were met. What more could he demand? But the restlessness grew. Last week, during a charity dinner, a businesswoman friend commented in passing that she had visited one of the stores and left with a strange impression. Not about the products, which were great, but about the environment. Something cold, mechanical, as if the people there were just following protocols without true human connection. Enrique smiled politely at the time, thanked her for the feedback, and said he would take it into consideration. But the phrase kept echoing. He returned to his desk, opened his notebook and began to research. He entered forums, read old reviews, and investigated comments he had never paid attention to before. And the more he read, the more an uncomfortable truth took shape before him. Many people reported positive experiences, yes, but there was a disturbing pattern in the negative ones. Customers dressed simply said they had been ignored. People asking basic questions received dry, rushed answers as if they were in the way. Those who didn't appear to have money were treated with visible impatience. Enrique closed the notebook with more force than he intended. That couldn't be true. He had invested in training, in organizational culture, in corporate values. He was certain his team knew the importance of treating all customers well. But then why so many similar reports? Why this insistence on the same complaint? The secretary entered with fresh coffee and a folder of documents. Enrique thanked her, but barely touched the cup. His mind was elsewhere. He thought about calling for an internal audit, hiring a company specialized in mystery shopping, or promoting new mandatory training. But all of that seemed distant, bureaucratic, insufficient. He needed to understand what really happened inside the stores, and not through filtered reports or rehearsed presentations. It was then that an idea began to form. Radical, risky, perhaps even absurd. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Enrique wanted to see it with his own eyes, not as the owner, not as the boss, not surrounded by the automatic reverence his position generated. He wanted to feel firsthand what an ordinary customer felt. More than that, he wanted to discover how his employees acted when they didn't know they were being observed by the boss. The idea stayed with him for the rest of the day. During the board meeting, while they discussed opening a new unit in the East Zone, Henrique was barely paying attention. His mind was rehearsing scenarios, imagining possibilities, calculating risks. Would it be possible? He, Henrique Almeida, a man known in São Paulo's business circles, entering one of his own stores without being recognized? That night at home he looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. Well-cut graying hair, a beard groomed by a private barber, cared for skin, the expression of someone in command. He wore a Swiss watch that cost more than many people earned in a year. His clothes were discreet but made of noble fabrics with impeccable cuts. Everything about him communicated power, status, confidence. How could he erase that? How could he become invisible? He spent the night thinking about it. He didn't sleep well. The hours dragged on between insomnia and restlessness. When the sun began to rise, Henrique had already made his decision. No matter how strange the idea seemed, he needed to do it. He needed to discover the truth. The next morning, he cancelled all his appointments for the day. He told his secretary he had a personal matter to resolve and was not to be disturbed. Then, he went to the closet, opened drawers he never opened, and looked for old clothes he kept without really knowing why. He found a pair of faded jeans, a simple t-shirt and worn-out sneakers, pieces he had received years ago, perhaps in some social action, and had never actually worn. He dressed slowly, feeling the different texture of the fabric, the strange fit of the clothes. He took off his wristwatch, left his gold wedding ring on the dresser, and put away his Italian leather wallet. He took only some change and an old wallet he found at the bottom of a drawer. He looked at himself in the mirror again and almost didn't recognize himself. He was no longer the businessman. He was just an ordinary, anonymous man, the type who went unnoticed on any corner of São Paulo. He left home without telling anyone, took a simple taxi instead of the chauffeured car, and asked to be dropped off 2 blocks away from the store he had chosen. It was a unit in the South Zone, a busy one, which he had visited only a few times in recent months. A place where no one would expect to see him. As he walked along the sidewalk, Henrique felt something strange. People passed him without looking, without greeting him, without that automatic deference that always accompanied his steps. He was just one more in the crowd, and that, in a way, was both liberating and disturbing. He stopped in front of the store. The facade was impeccable, the sign bright, the window display well organized. Everything was exactly as it should be. He took a deep breath. He was about to cross that door not as the owner, but as a stranger. He was about to discover a truth that reports would never reveal. And without knowing it yet, he was about to have his life transformed in a way he never imagined possible. Henrique Almeida pushed the glass door and entered. The store's air conditioning brought immediate relief from the street heat, but Henrique barely noticed. His eyes swept the environment with redoubled attention, observing every detail as if for the first time. The organized shelves, the wide aisles, the strategic lighting that highlighted the products. Everything there had been thought of by him, planned down to the smallest detail. But now, dressed as an ordinary person, he felt like a stranger in his own territory. 2 security guards at the entrance were talking to each other, relaxed. When Henrique passed, one of them cast a quick glance, the type of automatic evaluation every security guard makes. No greeting, no special attention, just the look of someone checking if there is anything suspicious. Henrique felt the weight of that look in a way he had never experienced before. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was cold, distant, as if he needed to prove he deserved to be there. He moved forward, walking slowly through the aisles. There was moderate movement that Wednesday morning. Some customers pushed carts, others leafed through products on the shelves. Employees circulated with badges hanging from their necks, some restocking goods, others checking labels. Henrique recognized some faces, people he had seen in general meetings or company events, but none of them recognized him now. He approached an electronics section, feigning interest in a blender on display. An assistant was nearby organizing boxes. Henrique waited a moment, thinking she would notice his presence and offer help. But the girl continued with her work without raising her eyes. He cleared his throat discreetly and moved a little closer. Nothing. It was then that he decided to speak. "Excuse me, could you help me with some information?" The assistant turned around, and Henrique noticed the expression of slight annoyance that quickly passed over her face. It was subtle, but it was there, an almost imperceptible discomfort at being interrupted. She looked him up and down, evaluating the simple clothes, the worn sneakers, the posture of someone not accustomed to demanding attention. "Yes," the girl replied, but the tone was more of obligation than genuine willingness. Henrique pointed to the blender. "I'm looking for a good product but at an affordable price. Is this one good quality?" The assistant gave a quick, almost dismissive look. "It's a basic model. If you want something better, there are others over there, but they are more expensive." She pointed vaguely to another shelf and was already starting to move away. Henrique insisted, trying to prolong the interaction. "And which one would you recommend? Which has the best value for the money?" The girl sighed so softly he almost didn't hear it. "Look, it depends on what you want to spend. If you have little money, take that one. If you want to invest more, go for the premium models, but that's a different price range." She spoke as if she were explaining the obvious to someone who understood nothing. Henrique felt his blood warm up, but he kept calm. "Thank you for the help," he said, but the irony went unnoticed. The assistant just nodded and went back to work, unceremoniously turning her back on him. He moved away, processing what had just happened. There was no explicit rudeness, nothing that could be classified as abuse. But there was something worse: indifference. The assistant didn't treat him poorly. She simply didn't treat him as someone who mattered. He was an inconvenience, an interruption to the routine, and that hurt in a way Henrique didn't expect. He continued walking, trying to absorb more of the environment. He observed other employees interacting with customers. Some did the basics, answered short questions, pointed directions. No human warmth, no real interest. But then he saw something that made him stop. A well-dressed woman with designer bags asked a salesman about a product. The transformation was immediate. The young man broke into a wide smile, approached with enthusiasm, and began to explain details with attention and patience. He even made a joke, drew laughter from the customer, and offered exclusive discounts. Henrique watched the whole scene. The contrast was glaring. It wasn't about efficiency or product knowledge. It was about who deserved attention. The well-dressed woman deserved it. He, with his simple clothes, did not. He decided to test further. He went to the information desk, where two female employees were talking animatedly about something from the weekend. Henrique waited politely for them to finish, but the conversation dragged on. One of them noticed his presence but didn't interrupt the chat. She just cast a look that said, "I'm busy, wait." After almost 2 minutes, the other employee finally asked, without hiding her impatience, "Can I help?" Henrique kept a respectful tone. "I'd like to know if you have any job openings available." The two looked at each other, and he clearly saw the exchange of glances that meant, "Here comes another one." One of them answered mechanically, like someone reciting something memorized. "We don't take resumes here. You have to register on the company website. You only get called if there's an open vacancy." "I see. And do you know if there's any forecast for opening vacancies?" "We don't have that information, only through the website." She was already turning back to the previous conversation, dismissing Henrique as if he were just another number in the unemployment line. He insisted one more time, wanting to see how far it went. "And what if I wanted to leave my resume anyway? Maybe for a future opportunity?" The employee sighed, visibly annoyed. "Look, I already told you. There's no point in leaving paper here. No one will see it. Register on the site and wait. If they call, they call. If not, it's because there's no vacancy. There's nothing we can do." The message was clear. "You are wasting my time." Henrique thanked them and walked away, feeling a mixture of anger, sadness, and disappointment. That was not the company he imagined he had built. That was not the treatment he believed his employees offered. He walked to the back of the store, trying to process everything. He leaned near a shelf of cleaning products, observing the movement around him. He saw people coming and going, employees performing tasks, customers choosing products. Everything worked like a well-oiled machine, but completely devoid of soul. It was then that he noticed something. A young employee with her hair tied in a ponytail and an impeccable uniform was helping an elderly lady find a product. The difference was immediate. There was patience in her voice, care in her gestures, genuine attention. The girl didn't just point to where the item was. She accompanied the lady there, took the product from the high shelf, explained how to use it, and asked if she needed anything else. Henrique watched, fascinated. Finally, someone who treated a customer with dignity. Someone who understood that serving was not lowering oneself, but elevating the other. The young woman finished helping the lady and went back to work, reorganizing products with care. Henrique kept watching. There was something different about her. It wasn't just technical competence. It was a deeper, rarer quality. It was humanity. He was about to approach when he heard a voice behind him. "Can I help with anything?" He turned and saw a section manager, identified by a different badge. The man looked at him with that expression Henrique already knew well, suspicion disguised as cordiality. As if he were checking if Henrique was a real customer or just someone killing time. "I'm just looking around," Henrique replied. "Okay, but if you need anything, we're here." The manager made a vague gesture toward the attendants and moved away, but Henrique noticed he continued to watch from a distance, guarding, as if Henrique were a potential threat. That was the final straw. Henrique left the store with a heavy heart and a painful certainty. The numbers didn't lie about profits and sales, but they hid a much more serious truth. His company treated people differently based on appearances, and that, he knew now, was a flaw that no report could measure. But there was a light in that darkness. A young employee who, even without knowing who he was, showed that hope still existed. And Henrique needed to find out more about her. Henrique returned to the store the next day. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had experienced. The experience had shaken him in a way that crisis meetings or drops in revenue never could. Discovering that his own company treated people with contempt based on appearances was like discovering a crack in the foundation of everything he had built, and now he needed to understand the depth of that problem. But there was another reason to return. That young employee, the one who treated the elderly lady with patience and care, the one who seemed to carry something different, a light of her own, amidst the general coldness. Henrique wanted to observe her better, to understand what made her act so differently from her colleagues. He entered the store in the middle of the morning, when the movement was still quiet. He wore the same simple clothes as the previous day, maintaining the disguise. He walked through the aisles with slow steps, feigning interest in products, but actually looking for her. It took a few minutes until he found her. She was in the housewares section, restocking items on a low shelf. Henrique stopped a few meters away, watching. The girl worked with attention, organizing each product with care, checking labels, adjusting the arrangement so that everything looked presentable. There was no mechanical haste in her gestures. There was zeal, as if every object there deserved to be treated with respect. He noticed the badge, Marina Santos. The name matched the impression he had of her, simple, Brazilian, without pretension. Henrique approached slowly, still uncertain how to start a conversation. Marina noticed his presence and raised her eyes. What Henrique saw at that moment surprised him. It wasn't the automatic look of evaluation the other employees had cast. It was a human look, genuine. "Good morning," she said, and there was warmth in that greeting. "Can I help with anything?" Henrique found himself momentarily speechless. It was so simple, so basic, but after what he had experienced the day before, that kindness sounded almost revolutionary. "Good morning," he replied, trying to sound natural. "I'm looking for some good dishcloths. My mother asked me to buy some, but I don't understand much about these things." He lied, improvising. Marina smiled, and the smile was sincere. She didn't have that air of superiority Henrique had seen in others. It was just the expression of someone willing to help. "I imagine it's difficult when you're not used to it," she said, standing up and dusting her hands on her uniform. "Come with me, I'll show you the options." She guided him to another shelf, explaining the differences between the fabrics, which ones were more absorbent, which ones lasted longer. She spoke clearly, without rushing, without making Henrique feel ignorant for not knowing. On the contrary, she treated every piece of information as if it were important, as if he were important. "These here are very resistant," Marina pointed to a set. "My mother uses them at home and they've lasted for years. I wash them all the time and they don't fray. I think your mother will like them." Henrique took the package, pretending to examine it. "Thank you for the help. You really know your stuff." Marina shrugged modestly. "You just end up learning, right? My mother was always very careful with things at home. She taught me that even a dishcloth has to be chosen right. It might seem like a small thing, but it makes a difference in the day-to-day." "It's not a small thing," Henrique said, and realized he was speaking with sincerity. "Small things matter." "Exactly," Marina agreed, and her eyes sparkled. "Sometimes people think only what is expensive or big has value, but it's not true. It's in the detail that we see the care." Henrique remained silent for a moment, absorbing those words. Coming from a young store employee, that simple wisdom had more depth than many elaborate speeches he heard at business conferences. "I'll take this one then," he said, holding the package. Marina nodded. "If you need anything else, just call. I'm around." Henrique walked toward the checkout, but he didn't stop observing her discreetly. Marina went back to the restocking work, but was interrupted by a customer who seemed lost. Henrique saw the same patience, the same attention, and the customer, a middle-aged woman in simple clothes, thanked her emotionally as if she were not used to being treated with such consideration. After paying and putting the bag away, Henrique didn't leave. He kept circling the store, always keeping Marina in his field of vision. He wanted to understand more. He wanted to see if that was consistent or just a lucky moment. And what he saw confirmed everything. Marina helped an elderly man carry a heavy purchase to the exit. She consoled a child who was crying while the mother looked for a product. She guided a young man looking for a job, giving honest tips about the selection process, even knowing she had no power to hire anyone. It was as if she simply couldn't ignore the needs of others, as if serving were something natural for her, not a professional obligation. Henrique also observed how the other employees interacted with Marina. Some seemed to respect her, but others cast looks like they thought she was trying too hard. One colleague even commented, loud enough for him to hear, "Why so much patience, Marina? These people don't even buy anything properly." Marina didn't answer. She just smiled slightly and continued her work. But Henrique saw the sadness that quickly passed through her eyes, the sadness of someone who knew she wasn't understood, but who wouldn't give up being who she was. The lunch break passed. Henrique, pretending he was waiting for someone, sat on a bench outside the store where he had a partial view of the parking lot and an employee break area. He saw Marina come out, carrying a simple lunchbox. She didn't go to the common area where other colleagues were talking animatedly. She went to a more private corner under a tree. Henrique watched from afar. Marina opened the lunchbox, looked at the contents, and then did something that left him intrigued. She separated half the food, put it in a smaller container she took from her bag, and put it back. Then she ate the part she had left, slowly, chewing each forkful as if she wanted it to last longer. That piqued his curiosity. Why separate the food? For whom? When Marina went back inside the store, Henrique followed her discreetly. She didn't go straight to her section. She went through the back hallway where the locker rooms and warehouses were located. Henrique kept his distance, but managed to see when she entered a small room. A few minutes later, she came out and went back to work. Henrique waited for Marina to move away, and then approached that room. The door was ajar. It was an improvised break space with old chairs and a small table. And there, sitting alone, was a middle-aged woman with simple clothes and a face marked by exhaustion. She was eating the food Marina had separated slowly, with her eyes closed, as if every forkful were a blessing. Henrique understood everything in that instant. That was Marina's mother, and the young woman was sharing her own meal with her, not because there was extra, but because it was what they had. Henrique's heart tightened. He went back inside the store, processing what he had discovered. Marina wasn't just kind to strangers. She carried a story of struggle, of silent sacrifice, of love that manifested in practical gestures. And yet, in the midst of all that, she found the strength to treat others with dignity. At that moment, Henrique knew he had found something rare. She wasn't just a competent employee, she was a person of extraordinary character, and he needed to know more about her story. Because Marina, without knowing it, was showing him something that all his years of success had not taught him. That true wealth is not in how much one has, but in how much one is able to give, even when one has little. Henrique spent the following days in a state of restlessness he didn't know how to name. During the day, he took care of business with the same efficiency as always, signed documents, participated in meetings, made decisions that moved millions. But at night, alone in his luxurious apartment, the image of Marina sharing her lunch with her mother would not leave his head. He wanted to know more. Not out of superficial curiosity, but out of a genuine need to understand how someone who clearly had so little could maintain such generosity of spirit. Henrique had met many people throughout his life, successful entrepreneurs, brilliant executives, people with impeccable backgrounds and enviable resumes. But few, very few, demonstrated the human depth he had seen in that young woman in a simple uniform and a sincere smile. He discreetly asked the Human Resources Department for Marina Santos's functional file. He did this without fanfare, as if it were just a routine check. What he discovered in the papers was only the basics. 24 years old, high school graduate, 3 years with the company, exemplary punctuality, no unjustified absences. But the official numbers and data didn't tell the real story. Henrique needed to go deeper. He returned to the store for the 3rd time that week, maintaining his disguise. He arrived earlier, before peak hours, and positioned himself strategically in a nearby cafe from where he had a view of the employee entrance. He wanted to see Marina arriving. He wanted to observe her day beginning. She appeared punctually, 15 minutes before the official time. She came on foot with a simple bag over her shoulder and her hair tied back practically. But she wasn't alone. Beside her, leaning lightly on her arm, walked the woman Henrique had seen eating the lunch that day. Marina's mother. Henrique watched the two talking as they approached. Even from a distance, he noticed Marina's attention, the way she held her mother's arm firmly but also delicately, as if wanting to protect without suffocating. They stopped in front of the store. Marina said something. The mother smiled and caressed her daughter's face tenderly. Then the woman continued on her way, walking slowly toward the service entrance, and Marina entered through the main door. Henrique finished his coffee and decided to follow Marina's mother, keeping a safe distance. The woman walked for 2 blocks to a small commercial building. She entered through a side door that led to the back, where the maintenance and cleaning areas were. That was where she worked. In the days that followed, Henrique put together a complete picture of that story. He talked discreetly with other shopkeepers in the region, always introducing himself as someone new to the neighborhood, curious about the people around. What he discovered was a narrative of silent struggle and unshakable dignity. Donna Conceição, Marina's mother, worked as a cleaner in 3 different places. She started at 6 in the morning in an office, moved on to a doctor's clinic in the middle of the day, and finished at a small market at night. Between one job and another, when possible, she stopped by the store where her daughter worked. It was there in that brief interval that the two met, and it was for that moment that Marina saved half of her lunch. Donna Conceição had been a widow for 6 years. Her husband, Marina's father, had worked his whole life as a bricklayer, an honest man who never grew rich, but who always ensured the family didn't go without. When he left only love, memories, and a lesson that Marina had completely absorbed. Dignity is not bought, it is carried. Life became difficult after that. Donna Conceição took on cleaning jobs to support the house. Marina, who was 18 at the time, dropped out of the technical course she was taking at night and started working as well. Together, they managed to pay the rent for a small apartment on the outskirts of São Paulo, buy the basics to eat, and keep the bills up to date. Nothing was left over. Luxuries were non-existent, but giving up was never an option. Henrique also discovered that Marina woke up every day at 5 in the morning. She prepared coffee, tidied the house, and made lunch boxes for herself and her mother. Then she walked with Donna Conceição to her first place of work, continued to the store, finished her 8-hour shift, and walked back home because she saved the bus fare. At night, when her mother arrived tired from 3 shifts, it was Marina who heated dinner, took care of the clothes, and organized everything for the next day. But what impressed Henrique most was discovering that even living with so little, Marina found ways to help other people. A neighbor told him that Marina used to take extra lunchboxes to elderly people in the building who lived alone. Another said the girl taught free tutoring to children in the community on weekends, always discreet, always without fanfare, as if that were just what any person should do. Henrique was devastated by what he discovered. While he lived in an apartment with a panoramic view of the city, Marina and her mother shared a tiny space in a distant neighborhood. While he dined in expensive restaurants, they shared a simple meal. While he worried about investments and profits, they worried about having enough to make it to the end of the month. And yet, even with all that, Marina radiated a light that he didn't see in anyone in his social circle. She had something money couldn't buy, genuine integrity. Henrique began to question everything. Had he really built something valuable? His company generated profits, yes, but did it generate humanity? His employees had salaries, but did they have dignity? He was respected, but did he respect? The answer hurt, because he knew he had failed. He had created an environment where people like Marina were rare exceptions, and people like those cold and arrogant employees were the norm. And the worst part, he had allowed it to happen. Not intentionally, perhaps, but by omission. By focusing only on the numbers and forgetting that behind every number there was a person. One afternoon, Henrique was again in the store watching Marina work when he witnessed something that made him make a final decision. A customer, visibly irritated, began to complain loudly about a product. He was being rude, disrespectful, throwing harsh words. Marina was called to try to resolve it. Instead of retaliating or getting defensive, she listened with patience, apologized for the inconvenience even though it wasn't her fault, and resolved the problem with such dignity that the man left embarrassed by his own rudeness. When it was all over, a colleague commented to Marina, "Why did you put up with all that? He was being horrible." Marina just smiled, tired. "He was angry, but it wasn't with me. Who knows what happened in his day? Sometimes people just need patience." That was too much for Henrique. He saw there not just a competent employee, but a teacher of humanity. Someone who taught through example, without beautiful words or elaborate theories, just by living her values. Henrique left the store that day with absolute certainty. It wasn't enough to keep watching. It wasn't enough to be indignant in silence. It was time to act. It was time to show everyone in the company what really mattered. And it was time to recognize that the most valuable person in that environment was not in any leadership position. She was restocking products on shelves with a minimum wage and a life full of challenges. Marina had given him the greatest lesson of his life without knowing it. Now it was time for Henrique to give back. But before anything else, before revealing who he really was, before promoting changes in the company, Henrique needed to do one last thing. He needed to be sure that Marina was exactly who she seemed to be. Because if she was, he wasn't just facing a good employee. He was facing a living example of everything his company should represent. Henrique's office was silent that Friday morning. He had arrived before everyone else, as he had for years, but this time it wasn't to review numbers or plan expansions. It was to think, to reflect on everything he had discovered in the last week and on what he would do from now on. Sitting in his leather chair, looking at the city waking up below, Henrique found himself at a crossroads. He could simply go back to the routine, pretend nothing had happened, maybe give Marina a raise and move on. It would be the easiest path, the least complicated, but he knew it would also be the most cowardly. What he had witnessed was not an isolated problem. It was a symptom of a cultural disease that he himself had allowed to grow. A culture where appearances mattered more than essence, where customers were treated differently based on clothes and accents, where employees like Marina were rare because the environment neither cultivated nor valued their qualities. Henrique picked up a pen and began to take notes. Not financial plans or sales targets. Notes about values, about principles, about the type of company he really wanted to lead. He wrote for hours, page after page, distilling everything he had learned in that transformative week. Around 10 in the morning, he called his assistant. The woman entered with her usual efficiency, tablet in hand, ready to take orders. "Christina, I want you to call a general meeting at the South Zone store. All the employees of that unit, tomorrow, Saturday, at 9 in the morning. The assistant raised her eyebrows, surprised. "All of them?" Even those who aren't scheduled? All of them. And it's not optional. I want 100% attendance. Tell them there will be an important announcement about the future of the company. Christina noted it down quickly. Any specific topic I should mention in the invitation? No. Just say it's urgent and everyone needs to be there. And Christina, one more thing. I want you to reserve a private room near the store. I'll need to change clothes before the meeting. The assistant looked confused, but knew Henrique well enough not to question him. Understood, sir. When he was alone again, Henrique continued his planning. He knew it wouldn't be easy. To confront a whole team, expose flaws, admit that he himself had been wrong, not to notice what was happening under his command. But it was necessary. Because leadership was not just about making comfortable decisions. It was about having the courage to do the right thing, even when it was painful. That night, Henrique barely slept. He mentally rehearsed what he would say, imagined reactions, prepared himself for resistance. But every time doubt arose, he remembered Marina sharing her lunch with her mother. He remembered her patience with the elderly lady. He remembered the gentle smile she offered to those no one else paid attention to, and that reignited his determination. Saturday morning, he woke up before the sun rose. He dressed in an impeccable brushed suit, the image of the successful businessman, but he took with him in a bag the simple clothes he had used in his disguise. He drove to the store in his car, but parked 3 blocks away. He entered the room Christina had reserved, locked the door, and changed clothes. Faded jeans, a simple t-shirt, worn sneakers. He looked at himself in the mirror. It was like going back to being that invisible man no one respected. But this time it would only be for a few minutes, just long enough to make a point. He went out the back door and walked to the store. Employees were arriving, some complaining about having to work on Saturday, others curious about the reason for the meeting. No one paid attention to Henrique. Once again, he was just an ordinary man, easily ignored. He entered the store and stood near the entrance, watching. The meeting was set for 9, and gradually, everyone gathered in the training area at the back. Henrique saw Marina arriving, punctual as always, with the expression of someone who was confused but obedient. She didn't recognize him either. When the clock struck 9, Henrique saw the store manager trying to organize everyone, asking for silence, saying they were waiting for an important announcement from the board. The atmosphere was tense, full of speculation. Some feared layoffs, others imagined drastic changes. Henrique waited another 5 minutes, letting the tension grow. Then, discreetly, he left through the side door, went back to the reserved room, and changed clothes again. Suit, tie, dress shoes. He returned to being Henrique Almeida, the owner, the boss, the man everyone knew but few really saw. He walked to the store with firm steps, but inside his heart was racing. That was a decisive moment, not just for the company, but for himself. It was time to prove he had learned something, that the experience of that week had not been in vain. He entered through the main door. The security guard, the same one who had cast suspicious looks when he was in disguise, this time broke into a wide smile and greeted him effusively. "Good morning, Mr. Almeida. We didn't know you would be coming in person." Henrique just nodded and moved forward. The difference in treatment was glaring. Employees who were scattered around the store rushed to organize everything perfectly. Those who had previously been cold and distant now exhibited nervous smiles and exaggerated reverence. He reached the training area. When he crossed the door, everyone stood up automatically in a mixture of surprise and forced respect. Henrique scanned the room with his eyes, recognizing faces. The assistant who had been dry with him, the manager who had watched him with suspicion, the information desk employees who dismissed his question about employment. And there in the corner was Marina, her eyes wide with surprise, trying to process what she saw. Henrique held her gaze for a second, seeing the exact moment when confusion began to give way to understanding. "Good morning, everyone," Henrique began, his firm voice echoing in the silent room. "I know you are wondering why I called this meeting, and I'll be direct. This week I did something I had never done before, something that completely changed my perspective on this company." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. All eyes were fixed on him, attentive to every word. "I spent a week disguising myself as an ordinary person and visiting this store, not as the owner, not as someone important, but as an ordinary customer, dressed simply, without power, without influence. And what I discovered was disturbing. A murmur ran through the room. Some employees exchanged nervous glances. Others lowered their eyes as if they already knew what was coming. Henrique continued, each word loaded with weight. I discovered that many of you treat people completely differently based on appearances. Well-dressed customers receive smiles and attention. Simple customers receive coldness and impatience. And that, my friends, is unacceptable. Embarrassment took over the environment. No one dared to speak, no one dared to move. But, Henrique said, and his voice softened slightly, I also discovered something extraordinary. In the midst of so much coldness, I found a light. A person who treated me with dignity when I didn't seem to have any value. A person who demonstrated values that every employee of this company should have, but which are unfortunately rare. He searched for Marina with his eyes. Everyone followed his gaze, and the young woman felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. The moment of the big revelation had arrived, and Henrique knew that from then on, nothing would ever be the same. Marina Santos. Henrique pronounced the name clearly, and the young woman felt her blood run cold in her veins. Please come up here to the front. All eyes turned to her. Marina stood up slowly, her legs shaking, not fully understanding what was happening. She walked among her colleagues, each step feeling like an eternity, until she stood beside Henrique. She kept her eyes down, nervous, afraid she had done something wrong. Henrique looked at her with an expression that mixed respect and gratitude. You can look at me, Marina. You didn't do anything wrong, quite the contrary. She raised her eyes, still confused, and Henrique addressed the gathered employees again. This week, when I entered this store in disguise, I was ignored, treated with impatience, and judged by my appearance. I was served with coldness, with disinterest, as if my presence were an inconvenience. Some of you barely looked me in the eye. Others clearly demonstrated that I wasn't worth your attention. The silence in the room was absolute. Some employees began to break into a cold sweat. Others shrank into their chairs, remembering interactions that now took on a new meaning. But Marina, Henrique continued, his voice gaining warmth, was different. She didn't know who I was. She had no reason to treat me well other than her own kindness. And yet, she offered me genuine help, treated me with respect, and gave me attention as if I were the most important person in the store at that moment. Marina felt tears beginning to form. Not out of sadness, but from an emotion she couldn't name. More than that, Henrique proceeded, I observed Marina throughout the week. I saw how she treats all customers regardless of who they are. I saw how she helps the elderly, calms children, guides those who are lost. I saw how she transforms every interaction into an act of kindness. And do you know what else I discovered? He paused, letting the question echo. I discovered that Marina lives a difficult reality, that she and her mother work hard to support their home, that she shares her own food because it's what she has, that she wakes up early and returns late, facing challenges that many here can't even imagine. And yet even with all that, she finds the strength to be kind, to be human, to treat others with dignity. Tears were now flowing freely down Marina's face. She never imagined that anyone had noticed her struggle, her silent routine, her small gestures of care. Henrique turned completely to her. Marina, you taught me something that years of college, leadership courses, and expensive consultancies never taught me. You showed me that a person's true value is not in the position they hold, the salary they receive, or the clothes they wear. It's in the character they carry, and you have an extraordinary character. Marina tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. She only managed to whisper an almost inaudible thank you. Henrique turned back to the other employees, and his tone became more serious. All of you work for me. You receive salaries, benefits, opportunities. But how many of you work with your heart? How many really care about the people we serve? How many see in customers not just sales numbers, but human beings who deserve respect? No one answered. Guilt hung heavy in the air. I failed as a leader, Henrique admitted, and the confession surprised everyone. I built a profitable company, but I didn't ensure it was human. I focused so much on results that I forgot about people, and you reflect that failure. But that ends today. He walked through the room, looking into the eyes of each one. From now on, this company will have new values. We are not just going to sell products, we are going to serve people. And anyone who cannot do that with dignity, anyone who cannot treat all customers with respect regardless of appearances, will have no place here. Is that clear?" Murmurs of agreement ran through the room. "And as for you, Marina," Henrique turned to her again, his voice softening, "you will no longer work restocking shelves. Starting Monday, I want you to take over as customer service coordinator. You will be responsible for training the entire team, for teaching them what you already know how to do naturally, for showing that serving is not lowering oneself, it is elevating oneself." Marina's eyes widened, incredulous. "But sir, I don't have experience in coordination. I don't know if—" "You have something better than technical experience," Henrique interrupted her gently. "You have integrity, you have empathy, you have values, and that isn't taught in any course. You either have it or you don't, and you have it." Marina's tears were now accompanied by a smile. She had never imagined her life could change like this, that her small gestures of kindness, which she did without expecting anything in return, could be seen, valued, and rewarded. Henrique extended his hand. Marina shook it, feeling the firmness and respect in that gesture. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." "Thank you," Henrique replied, "for teaching me to truly see." The meeting ended in silence. Employees left with their heads down, others emotional, all reflecting on what they had heard. Some approached Marina to congratulate her, others to apologize for having been cold to customers in the past. When everyone had left, Marina stayed for a moment alone with Henrique. "Mr. Almeida, can I ask a question?" "Of course, and call me Henrique, please. Why did you do this? Why did you disguise yourself?" Henrique thought for a moment. "Because numbers don't show everything, Marina. Because sometimes we need to step out of our comfort zone to see the truth. And because I needed to find out if my company had a soul. And thanks to you, I found out it does. It may be hidden, forgotten, but it exists. And it's in people like you." Marina smiled, and there was peace in that smile. "My mother always said that we have to treat others the way we would like to be treated. It doesn't matter if the person is rich or poor, important or not. Everyone deserves respect. Your mother is a wise woman, and she raised an exceptional daughter. In fact," Henrique added, "I'm going to provide a better health plan for you both. And if your mother wants, we have openings in our general services team with much better conditions than the 3 jobs she has now." Marina couldn't hold back the tears. This time they were tears of pure gratitude, of relief, of hope. "I don't know how to thank you." "Continue being who you are, Marina," Henrique said simply. "It's more than enough." In the months that followed, the South Zone store underwent a silent but profound transformation. Marina, as coordinator, implemented training that didn't just talk about sales techniques, but about empathy, listening, and respect. She shared her own story, showing that those who serve are not inferior to those who are served. She taught that every customer, without exception, deserves dignity. Some employees resisted at first, but gradually, seeing the results, they began to change. Complaints about coldness in service decreased drastically. Positive reviews increased. And more than that, the atmosphere of the store became different. There was human warmth, there was connection, there was purpose. Henrique followed everything closely. He visited the store regularly, now always as himself, but paying attention not just to the numbers, but to the people. He saw customers leaving satisfied not just with the products, but with the service. He saw employees smiling truly, not just out of obligation. And he saw Marina flourishing. She had found her purpose, her voice. She was no longer just the girl who restocked shelves. She was a leader, a mentor, a living example that true values can transform environments. Donna Conceição had also accepted the job offered by Henrique. Now she worked in only one place, with a decent salary and benefits. For the first time in years, mother and daughter were able to have dinner together every night without the exhaustion of multiple shifts. On a Saturday afternoon, Henrique met Marina in the parking lot about to leave. She was different, not just because of the better clothes or the well-kept hair. There was a different light in her eyes, a confidence that came from being valued. "Marina, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, Henrique. Did you know that week that I was testing you?" She laughed, shaking her head. "Not at all. I just did what I always do. I treated you as I would like to be treated, as my mother taught me. And if you had known I was the owner, would you have acted differently? Marina thought for a moment, sincere. Maybe I would have been more nervous, but no, I don't think I would have changed my way of treating you. Because kindness shouldn't depend on who is in front of us, right? It should be who we are. Henrique smiled, feeling a deep gratitude. Exactly. And that's why you taught me the most important lesson of my life. Which one? That true wealth is not in what we accumulate. It's in what we are able to give even when we have little. You had little, Marina, but you gave a lot. And that is worth more than all the millions I have ever earned. Marina blushed modestly. I just did what was right, Henrique. And that, he replied, is the hardest thing to do, especially when no one is looking. They said goodbye, each going their own way. But that encounter had transformed both of them forever. Henrique had learned that success without humanity is empty. Marina had learned that kindness, even when discreet, never goes unnoticed. And the store, that space that before was just a point of sale, had become something greater. A place where people were seen, heard, and respected, where appearance did not define treatment, where serving was an honor, not a humiliation. Because in the end, the true transformation was not in the processes or the training. It was in the simple but profound understanding that every human being deserves dignity, and that when we treat others with respect, no matter who they are, we are not just changing them. We are changing ourselves. Henrique Almeida had entered that store as a disguised millionaire, seeking to test the character of his employees. He left as a transformed man who had learned that true character reveals itself not when we have everything, but when we have nothing to offer but our humanity. And Marina Santos, the young woman who lived with little but gave much, showed the world that the greatest wealth anyone can have is not bought, not inherited, not conquered. It simply is. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Henrique and Marina has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of transformation and discovered along with them that true value lies in the way we treat people, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it when Henrique realized the coldness of his company? Was it when Marina shared her lunch with her mother? Or was it the final revelation that changed everything? Every day we bring intense and profound stories like this one, which reveal the most beautiful and true side of the human soul. Stories that make us reflect, cry, and believe that kindness still exists. We wait for you in the next episode.